We'll begin.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Helena Henderson. I'm the Executive Director of the New Orleans Bar Association. And we're going to talk about the role of the courts in upholding and strengthening the rule of law because it's crucial. The courts serve as the guardians of our Constitution and our legal framework, and they ensure that the laws are applied consistently and fairly. This critical function underscores how the rule of law is fundamental to our well-being, as it is the underpinning for better economic development and investment, higher educational attainment, better public health, and of course, something that we want all around the world, peace. The structure, predictability, and reliability that the courts provide is key to society's well-being. For the last several years, so many of us have felt uneasy with the events surrounding us. How many times have you said in exasperation, "You can't do that. That's wrong. It's not fair." Right now, we're at an inflection point in our history. We are witnessing the unraveling of the fabric of society, not only in the United States, but around the world. Every time our justice system is attacked, or constraints on governments falter, corruption occurs, or unfairness or inequalities go unaddressed, we see the unraveling of the rule of law. At this inflection point, there could be dire consequences. So now is the time. It's the time when the courts can reweave the fabric of society. The courts, including judges, lawyers, and court managers, you ensure that justice is served, that rights are protected, and the principles of democracy and governance are upheld. This fabric of society that is so vital is the rule of law, and our courts, judges, and lawyers weave this essential fabric. This fabric gives us the structure to operate in society. It's the fairness for trust in our institutions and the predictability that a thriving economy needs. The rule of law provides prosperity, education, healthcare, and peace in countries around the world. Each of you plays a significant role weaving the fabric of society. The World Justice Project, using leading data scientists and experts worldwide who have distilled the events that we've been seeing so that all the markers of our well-being are quantified. There are tangible economic indicators such as increased investment due to investor confidence, economic growth, higher incomes where everyone benefits when the rule of law is higher. It's prosperity. The World Bank, the WHO, the United Nations, and countries around the world use this data. Weaving the fabric of society is the most important project that any of us will ever work on. I've been executive director of the New Orleans Bar Association almost 35 years, and this is the most important project I have ever worked on. Now is the time. This is our legacy to the future. Click. The rule of law is like oxygen. Judges and lawyers, we have a perspective on the rule of law. We're familiar with the concept and thinking about it on a regular basis, but for many people, the rule of law is most noticeable in its absence. In moments of crisis, people are more likely to understand what's at stake. But these events and these incidents don't arise out of the blue. There are warning signals, and they generally reflect the strains on the rule of law. So we can't wait till everything collapses or crumbles when it's time for us to stand up for the rule of law. So what is the rule of law? The term rule of law, it gets thrown around a lot, and it's often misused, both here in the United States and worldwide. Sometimes the term is even co-opted to justify abuses of power. We know that the rule of law is not the rule by law. So what is the rule of law? We need to define it. right? And thanks to Bill Newcomb over 10, 12 years ago, he was the visionary who saw that we need to focus on this. It's a durable system of laws, institution, norms, and community commitment that delivers 4 universal principles: accountability, just law, open government, accessible and impartial justice. Accountability ensures that no one is above the law. A just law ensures that everyone's rights are protected. An open government ensures that the law isn't arbitrary, but it's predictable and widely understood. And accessible and impartial justice means that everyone has a fair way to resolve disputes that arise. To go back to the oxygen analogy, democracy only burns bright when the rule of law feeds its flame. Here in the United States, people may understand that the Constitution is a brilliant and historic document, but it may be harder for people to pin down what actually ensures that makes democracy function well. We need to move from the abstract to the concrete. This takes trust, and trust that the system is fair and that it's not rigged for anyone or against anyone. Trust is essential. Trust is the foundation for economic confidence. It's crucial for financial and regulatory markets, and it's absolutely essential for social cohesion in societies. So the rule of law, what is it? The World Justice Project's website, along with some sample questions, can be found at this website here. And there are also some graphics that help explain why the rule of law is so important. And now I'm going to turn things over to Alicia Evangelides, who is the data expert, and she's the director of the Rule of Law Index. Alicia?
Thank you. Thank you, Helena. It's really nice to be here. I hope you can all hear me okay. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. The World Justice Project has created an index that we use to apply this definition that Helena just mentioned to countries around the world. So our WJP Rule of Law Index measures adherence to the rule of law in 142 different countries and jurisdictions around the world, drawing on surveys of over 149,000 households and over 3,400 legal experts. Our index reflects people's experiences and perceptions of the rule of law in their countries. Using survey data, the index assigns each country to an overall rule of law score, as well as scores for 8 factors and 44 sub-factors of our index. These factors and sub-factors are what make up the definition of our index. And the index is produced on an annual basis. It launches in October of each year. So we're currently preparing the 2024 edition of our index. Now, let's take a look at some of the findings from our index. We'll start with some of our global findings, and then we'll turn to the US in particular. This map here shows where rule of law is stronger and weaker around the world. The countries in green are the strongest, with dark green representing the highest scores in the rule of law index. You can see that the top 10 countries are all in Europe, with the exception of New Zealand coming in at number 8. Meanwhile, we have the countries in orange and red, which have weaker rule of law, Here you can see the bottom 10 countries, which have more geographical diversity. They include countries in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. The WJP Rule of Law Index also allows us to see changes in the rule of law over time. So this map, for example, shows changes in the rule of law between 2022 and 2023. One notable result this year is that around the world, the rule of law continues to weaken. On this map, you can see in blue the countries that have improved between 2022 and 2023, and in red, those that have declined, with the darker colors indicating a bigger change in rule of law. Our data shows that over the past year, the rule of law has declined in 82 countries, or 59% of the countries included in our index, and improved in only 41% of those countries. This means that more than 6 billion people are living in countries where the rule of law is weaker this year than it was last year. That's equivalent to about 76% of the world's population. And these declines are widespread and seen in all corners of the world, as you can see on the map. Now, by creating the Rule of Law Index, the World Justice Project has been able to demonstrate how rule of law goes hand in hand with stronger communities. For instance, where rule of law is stronger, so is the economy. As you can see in the scatter plot, countries with strong rule of law also tend to have higher GDP per capita, and the GDP data that we use comes from the World Bank's World Development Indicators. Countries with stronger rule of law also have more peace. Peace data in this instance comes from the Institute for Economics and Peace's Global Peace Index. People are also healthier and live longer in countries with stronger rule of law. This next graphic shows how life expectancy is higher in countries with strong rule of law. We measure life expectancy from the World Development Indicators, again, from the World Bank Group. And education is also related to the rule of law. Children stay in school longer, and the population is more educated in countries where rule of law is stronger. So years of education data is what we're showing here, correlated against our rule of law index, and that's again coming from the World Bank Group. As I mentioned earlier, the WJP Rule of Law Index measures 8 factors in order to determine a country's overall rule of law score. Those factors can be seen on the screen. We have constraints on government powers, absence of corruption, open government, fundamental rights, order and security, regulatory enforcement, civil justice, and criminal justice. Now, can you guess which factor you think declined most widely in the last year? Anyone have a guess? Okay, we will tell you then. The factor to decline the most in 2023 was civil justice. So civil justice scores declined in 2/3 of the countries in our index, and this includes the United States, as you can see on the map. This was largely due to longer justice delays and weaker enforcement. Criminal justice also declined in a majority of countries last year, and 56% of countries included in our index. Year-to-year changes can be marginal and fluctuate, so it's worth taking a look at the longer-term trends to get a sense of rule of law trends. The WJP Rule of Law Index shows that the world has been experiencing a rule of law recession for a number of years now. Here you can see how almost all of the rule of law factors have declined in a majority of countries since 2016. You'll see at the bottom that both civil and criminal justice got weaker in more than 70% of countries in this time period. At the top of this graphic, you can see that constraints on government powers fell in almost 3/4 of countries. That means that checks and balances are getting weaker and weaker. Rising authoritarianism has also taken a toll on factor 4, fundamental rights. This factor has fallen the most in all of our factors since 2016, declining in 77% of our countries in our index. Overall, 78% of countries have seen their overall rule of law score decline since 2016. And you can see that by the dark red, which includes the United States. The biggest declines in rule of law since 2016 include Myanmar, Nicaragua, Iran, Belarus, and Brazil, with their percentage decreases highlighted in red. So next, I will turn it over to Judy to share some of our findings for the U.S., unless we have any questions about the global findings to start with. All right, let's turn to the U.S.
Well, good morning, everyone. There's nothing more important, I know, in your minds, in your everyday jobs than context. So I'll give you a bit of context to supplement what Helena and Alicia have shared with you. When Bill Newcomb started this project, it was actually a committee of the American Bar Association when he was president. And like other presidents, he started to look and focus, have the ABA focus on something particularly important to him and what he thought was compelling for the future of the association, for the profession, for our court system, and for justice around the world. And I can tell you that in this little town of New Orleans, as a result of that effort during the year and year after that Bill was president, we held 2 rule of law conferences or conclaves, and neither of them would have happened without the support of the courts. In both instances, we actually were hosted at the Federal District Court here right on Poydras Street, the Eastern District of Louisiana, with the support of the U.S. Fifth Circuit as well. And we also, in the second year, were hosted by the Louisiana Courts of Appeal. They all came together with the bar associations locally, the state, the affinity, and local bar associations, as well as the community of lawyers. But that certainly wasn't the key to the success of those meetings. The gatherings were about bringing people well beyond the typicals, right? All of us in the room who would come listen to a rule of law session, who would spend their day away from their very busy jobs. And we invited doctors and educators at all levels. We invited journalists, we invited engineers, we invited officials with the government, and brought them all together because we know that sometimes we lawyers, particularly I'll say that, like to talk, but we have to be also very good listeners. And if we're not good listeners, we're not doing the job that we need to do as public servants and public citizens for our communities. So I just start with that context historically to let you know that, this is one of those projects that came out of an idea, one person's idea. And he said, what if and why not? And when I know in your court systems you've said, what if and why not? You've always had things, sometimes it fails, right? But most often you get better ideas, you bring better service to the people whom you want to deliver that service to. So keep that as point number 1 on context. Point number 2 on context is what Alicia and Helena just shared with you. And that is, we're going to turn in a minute to the U.S. But boy, every time I hear that data from the World Justice Project's global data that comes out of the work that these extraordinary staff people do, it makes me pause and it makes me think about, we always think of ourselves as this beacon of democracy, this beacon of the rule of law. And we talk democracy and rule of law to countries that don't want to be a democracy sometimes, right? But they want the rule of law. And we don't turn our backs at WJP on those countries at all. But what it tells us is that this is exactly the kind of contextual learning that we in the U.S. have to do more of. In our profession, I will say, as lawyers particularly, because we can learn so much from other countries, not only from their slippage, but also from what they're doing right. And one of the things that we hope that we can share with you as we go on in this time together is some of the really neat things that are going on in different countries all over this globe because of some of the funding and other things that the World Justice Project is doing. And that's selfish on the part of the World Justice Project because it's how we learn. It's how we understand better how we can do things in other countries, maybe than perhaps it's going on right now, and how we can even do things better in the United States. And you see, here's that bias. You just heard me? I said how we can even do better in the United States. We've got a lot to learn, and we've got to, as a country, open up our minds to how we can do better for everybody here. So with that, in that context, I ask you to come along with me as Alicia clicks those slides and I share with you, thank you, some of the extraordinary information that comes out of this group. And I've been with Bill Newcomb on this journey since he started at the ABA, and I have the pleasure of serving on the volunteer side as a vice president, but have no doubts about it, let me put it that way. It is this extraordinary staff, Alicia and many others at the World Justice Project, that makes this collection of data, the integrity of the index, that is so well and highly regarded, as Helena said, what it is today. So how does the U.S. rank in the rule of law? Any guesses on where we are out of the 142 countries? Anybody want to throw out a number? Couldn't hear you. 26. Who said that? There you go. Is it up there already? No, you looked it up. That's right. Okay, I'm going home. No. No, 26. You may say at first, well, that's not too bad, is it? Right? That's not too bad. Think about that. 26 out of 142 countries that we've looked at. And think about what Alicia told you before about the ones who rank at the top and the ones who rank at the bottom. And yet we're at 26. Here you can see the rankings of the U.S. by factor. And you'll notice that the strongest rule of law factor for us is open government, where we rank 15th. But fundamental rights and civil justice, we rank 38th out of all the countries. Next, we'll take a look at what we call a spider web or a spider graphic. And these are sort of fun to look at because it takes you a few moments to absorb it. At least it takes me a few moments to take it in. But what it shows you is that the more perfect, instead of union, the more perfect rule of law would be one that is closer to the edges of the circle, right? Or at the edges of the circle. And unfortunately, no country gets there. But you can see this one is one where Denmark, if you will, this is the United States we have up right now. And it shows you where we are and how on some things we go to the center and some things we go out. And each factor here is determined that you see up there of the 8 factors is determined by between 4 and 8 sub-factors on each point. So in the section, the places where the line jags toward the center, as I said, that indicates a weakness, and where it jags toward the outside perimeter, that's where it's strongest. And that tells you, and keep that visual in mind, if you will, for the next slide. These are the spider graphs on Denmark, the USA, and Venezuela. Absorb that for a minute.
Exactly.
And so you can see that there are, of course, differences, but there are, of course, similarities. And that's where that learning process begins, right? Looking across, and that's, we'll talk about in the interactive tools that the WJP has available, but you can go online and, just slice it and dice it any way you want, which is the beauty of what these extraordinary minds do at the WJP. And you can look at all the different factors. You can look at the countries. You can look at the regions. It's phenomenal because you really do get greater insights into what the index looks like across the globe. So here we are, the U.S. in the 26th ranking globally, but we're in the bottom half of the 43 highest income countries. Resources, yes. Rule of law? Think about that. In my mind, that puts a heavier weight on all of our shoulders, right? Because we have the resources to do better. And we've just got to have the drive and the commitment to do better. Next slide. Let's look at equality and the long-term weaknesses. So this is some different data points, if you will, or different factors and sub-factors. Out of 142 countries on accessibility and affordability, look where we rank. 115th. Take a pause on that. I know that one's near and dear to your heart. It's near and dear to everybody's heart in this room. On discrimination, 106th. On impartiality of the criminal justice system, 109th. And on absence of discrimination in civil justice, 124th. Now, we gave you a little bit of a sense of how this is all gathered and all, but know that this is done repeatedly year over year. So we can also look back at trends and understand things better. And we're gathering this data from these household surveys, almost 149,000 household surveys across the world, and from teams of experts all over. And by the way, we invite you to be a part of that expert pool, if you will, a rich bench that we have of experts, and we'd love to get your input if you're interested in doing so. And Alicia can give you the details of what kind of commitment that involves in our quest to have you do it year after year. But let's look at below average the U.S. has on equal justice. And think about this. On the criminal justice being impartial, look at the index rating, if you will, the index score, I should say, for high-income countries that I was talking about, those 43 high-income countries. then look at the global average, and then look at the U.S. score. And then take a look at the right side of the page. Civil justice is free from discrimination. Look at the high income average. Look at the global average, and then look at that U.S. score. And I hope you can see it from the different angles in the room. So we also try to delve into what's the causes for this. And the most serious causes or challenges or problems, depending on how you want to look at this in the U.S. in terms of responses, is that cases take too much time. There's an insufficient number of judges and court personnel, and there's a lack of adequate resources. And probably we'd get an amen in this room if we said that, right, in terms of the adequate resources. And that's one of the things that we lawyers, and I will tell you the legal profession, and of course the American Bar Association, needs to keep the drumbeat going about. We have to make sure that we talk when you can't, that we let the legislatures at the state level, and particularly in Congress, know that you need more, whether you're in the federal courts or the state courts. And I think that is a critical obligation of the legal profession as the organized bar, to make sure that you are getting the resources you need in order to do the job. So those are insights, if you will, that hopefully is something you can carry home and think about and focus on. We also talked about the fact that we do these end over end. And so you have an opportunity through the Rule of Law Index at WJP to look at trends. And I ask you to take a moment and look at this trend. So Alicia told you before, the Rule of Law Index has been declining since 2016 globally. This shows you the Rule of Law Index in the U.S. So we had really experienced a significant decline in the U.S. by 2021. And there was a little bit of an uptick, certainly not surpassing 2021, but a little bit of an uptick that we saw, at least some stabilization in 2020. So we waited to see, of course, in 2023, as we keep looking at all this, what's the recovery if it's gonna continue? And I think Alicia can show us that, right? Yeah. Not there yet. Hopeful, but not yet. So what are we looking at in terms of the declines in the U.S. since 2016 particularly? What's driving the index overall to go down? Overall, the rule of law is down in the U.S. since 2016, and that's being driven by constraints on government powers. You heard a little bit of a good note on open government, right? That was a positive for us. Fundamental rights are down significantly, criminal justice and civil justice. And those are all things that I know, that we know we can do better. And that is not on your shoulders alone. That is not on your shoulders alone. That's going to take an all-in effort by judges, by lawyers, by practitioners. And I would suggest to you, not only litigators, which I was for many, many years, and I was in-house for 12 years after litigating for 20-something. So I've seen it from the client side as well as the private practice side. But it takes the deal makers in the firms, it takes the people who do the regulatory work, it takes everybody pitching in, the ethics work, everybody, in order to see what we know are needed improvements. This next slide shows you declines in looking deeper at sub-factors that build up to the factors, the 8 factors, on whether what the perspectives are. And what we see is that criminal justice is impartial, there's been a decline in that since 2016. Civil justice is free of discrimination, significant decline. Government powers are effectively limited by the legislatures, decline. And criminal justice is free of improper government influence, another significant decline. And then we turn to looking at additional declines in the U.S., and those are government powers are effectively limited by the judiciary. There's a decline there. Government officials are sanctioned for misconduct, a decline. Government powers are subject to non-governmental checks, and freedom of opinion and expression is effectively guaranteed. A lot to take in. Now let's look at Americans and how they feel about voting. The question posed was, or the statement posed was, people can vote freely without feeling harassed or pressured. Remember, these are perspectives, right? 2021. 58%. Oh, 91, I was right. 91%, 58% of people thought that. And you can see that the next slide shows the 91% agree. That was in 2016, that people can vote, feel freely without feeling harassed or pressured. Now watch, that number has declined over time. She'll show you a bar graph. In 5 years' time, look what's happened. And this takes you out of, in some ways, of course, your hats as incredibly impactful court administrators and court managers, and into your role of what I like to call for lawyers, and I think it applies for you as well as public citizens, to see how we can all engage in our local communities and our neighborhoods in making sure that people and their perceptions is that they can vote without feeling pressured or harassed. The next slide is about confidence in government accountability and shifts in the next decade. There's some figures up there. Any idea on what you think is the accountability shift in the last decade? I'm sorry? A. The gentleman said 60%. The gentleman is right. And how do Americans feel about government accountability over time? We go back to 2013 through 2021, and you can see a high-ranking government, the statement posed was a high-ranking government official would be held accountable for breaking the law. A high-ranking government official would be held accountable for breaking the law. That's 2021. We'll ask that, I'm sorry? We will see. Well, the question's been asked, the new data will come out, and we will see. And then how widely, to understand better, how widely do Americans embrace rule of law values? And you heard Helena talk about that definition of the rule of law. And this is one of my, I think, the most interesting questions or statements. The president or prime minister of a country, so this is pulling from global, right, must always obey the law in the courts. And you have some possibilities there. 52%, 70%, 86%, and 87%. And I'm just going to ask Alicia to put those up and see if that's what you expected.
That's
The
my
president,
favorite graph.
The prime minister must always obey the law in the courts. Now, there may be a good news story here, right? Look at the alignment in the U.S. among different parties, members who identify themselves from different parties. That's something to take home and think about. That's something to maybe build from a foundational perspective about what can be done here. So that means, and I'm an optimist, so I confess, that means that Americans perhaps are united on that front and not as divided. And we are all looking for that optimism in this day and age. So I'll just close with the notion that there's a lot of data here. We encourage you, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but encourage you to really go around and learn how to use the index and play, because we're just giving you sort of the tip of the iceberg on what it holds in terms of richness. And if we can have in this room, and I'm sure we do, people from all across the country, and you bring that back to your communities and your neighborhoods, not only within your court family, but starting there. And you use these slides to tell this story about this journey for a stronger rule of law. You'll be doing more than we can ever ask of you in terms of contributing to what we know is a lot of work ahead. Thank you.
So Court administrators have a special role to play. Everyone in this room has a role that can ensure public trust and confidence in the courts. We know that attacking the courts can lead to a crisis of legitimacy. Why? Because if society loses faith in the court system or the judiciary's ability to render unbiased decisions, the very foundation of legal redress and enforcement becomes unstable. It can lead to a breakdown in following laws and a diminishment of the enforcement of rights. There goes your rule of law. It is that simple. And as someone who came back to New Orleans just a few short weeks following Katrina and watched the breakdown of the rule of law, it was just extraordinary to see what happened and how quickly society broke down. So, how do you support the rule of law in the courts? Think about it. Sometimes it's the very simple things. Are your courts accessible? And what I mean by that is both physically and in your communications. What happens, Judy and I were talking, what happens if somebody shows up to court and they can't speak English? They still have rights. So those are the things that are the foundation of the rule of law. Are we treating everyone equally and fairly? We talked about a mother who may show up at court and gets dismissed by court staff because she's not able to communicate well, or they're aggravated and tired. I see it with my own staff. We have an influx of calls from the public, and sometimes they're frustrating. This is the kinds of things that make a difference to the rule of law, because it's about our well-being. The rule of law it's measuring our well-being. Think about it. Is there timely case processing in the courts? This is the rule of law. I know that you all publish very robust performance metrics. This is good. Applause to you all. This is the kind of thing that helps deal with the transparency. And I just applaud your use of those core competencies, because you are training and enforcing the courts in ethical standards. Judges have a role to play. Everyone in the room. So the judges who uphold the rule of law in our courtrooms every day, they interpret the laws and the facts, and they fairly apply the law. They're impartial, they protect rights, they resolve the conflicts, they maintain judicial independence. This is critical. We just did a panel discussion on judicial independence, and it is astonishing to me that our judges, our clerks, and our court staff are being threatened. You need to be free from outside influence. We have a role to play in all of this. The judges, they uphold human rights and freedoms. Per the ABA model of judicial conduct, the judiciary plays a central role in preserving the principles of justice and the rule of law. And lawyers should further the public understanding of and confidence in the rule of law and the justice system. And every time I read that, as the head of my bar association, I have to look at myself. What are we doing? What can we do better? And I know that you all look at your processes and procedures and think the same thing. Judges, individually and collectively, must respect and honor the judicial office as a public trust and strive to maintain and enhance confidence in the justice system. Judy, do you want to talk about the role that lawyers play?
Yeah, thanks, Helena. I think that we have to look at that sort of at different levels. And I think it is critically important to understand the role of the organized bar at the national, state, local, and affinity bar level. But I also think it's important to understand and pause to think about the role of the individual lawyer. Because I've seen some individual lawyers do some extraordinary things in our community. and judges and court personnel as well. I'm born and raised in New Orleans, so I might be a little bit myopic when it comes to thinking about how the world should be. Even with all of our bumps and warts and bruises here, it's beloved by me. And it's beloved by me as a resident and as a person who raised 4 kids here. And by the way, they're all coming home, and several have already. But what I also know is that it's beloved by me as a city because of what I've come to see from the time when I was a first-year lawyer out of law school and went to a firm here and quickly got to understand, I think, what is an extraordinary relationship between our bench and our bar and our courts. And I have had this wonderful year of service for the American Bar Association and all that leads up to it for many years. And while I know there's some great things that go on in other communities, it is one of these proud moments for me to hold the New Orleans and Louisiana bar community out to everybody else in the country. And I'll say it again and again when I have opportunity. We have, on a regular basis, and I'm going to use the word intentionally, hordes of judges showing up. Our clerks of court at both the federal and state levels show up. Our court staff show up. And they come together from everything from CLEs to bar conventions to barbecues to favorite cocktail night to trivia nights to raise money for legal services here and so much more. And one of the people who, of course, is behind so many of those efforts is Helena, who leads the charge for so many years at the New Orleans bar. But the state bar does it, and the affinity bars get together, and we all do it together. And there is this, and I think this goes, and this is really goes to the, not just to tell you something of a fairy tale story, but it goes to the rule of law directly, because it's about trust and confidence in the courts and the public understanding of the courts, right? And your role. And the judges go out into the community. Our federal judges serve regularly at soup kitchens. They do a regular clinic, for notarial acts. They run programs. They can't serve as a state bar president, but they serve, our federal sitting judges have served as presidents of the New Orleans bar, of the federal bar chapter, which, by the way, is the second largest federal bar association chapter in the country, is in little old New Orleans, behind D.C. So that's kind of tell you about this. All is based on this understanding that's ingrained in you as a young lawyer, and I know as of my firm, that those judges come because they know that no one's going to approach them about anything on a case or a matter, right? That there's going to be this extraordinary respect for the roles of each person there at a social gathering, but that they know that they can impart this trust and confidence by showing up. They show up. And have you ever read that little bitty skinny book by Bill Gates Sr., whom I adored? It's called Showing Up for Life. It's about 120 pages. If you send me an email, I'll send one to you. I'll lend you mine. It's about showing up for life. And these judges at the state and local and administrative judge level, they do that. They show up for things that are important to give cohesion to the organized bar. And that is a story. And they go out into communities. They go out into classrooms across the state. And I just encourage you, if you ever want to follow that lead, talk to Helena, talk to the Supreme Court, our wonderful judicial administrator, Sandra Vivinovich, or our clerk of court, Veronica Conclaves. It is something to behold. And if you look at what lawyers can do, lawyers need to be responsive to that and show up, of course, as well. Not just to rub elbows with the judges, but to be a part of something that's bigger than each of them individually. And I can be a nerd about the model rules of professional conduct. And my favorite part of them, no offense to anything else in the rules, is the preamble. And I think all of us who are lawyers and all of us who work with lawyers sometimes forget to go read that preamble. And in Comment 6, there's some extraordinary language about the lawyer's role as a public citizen. And you heard me use that term hopefully earlier. And I think when we put that hat on and we really think about that role, it affords us the best vantage point to strengthen the rule of law. And there are so many opportunities, whether with the World Justice Project, which right now is collaborating with the National Conference of Bar Presidents, so we can reach into each and every one of your communities and help you get started or reinforce the extraordinary work that you're likely already doing to strengthen the rule of law. So it's at that individual lawyer level that I think we all have an obligation and commitment to be fulfilled. It's at all of us who work with other lawyers to help them understand that and, suggest something to them. But it's furthermore the organized bar who has this, I believe, obligation to be engaged and upfront on the rule of law and to show people that we can disagree without being disagreeable, that we can have a difference of opinion and be respectful of others. And most importantly, that we are public citizens and that we are truly, truly servants of the public. And I know that at least in the courthouses around here, and I managed litigation for half of the country at one point in my career and was in a lot of small and big courthouses. And I can tell you that when you walk into that courthouse, even as somebody who managed litigation for a company of 90-something thousand employees, it can be intimidating, right? And when I see one of those faces that says, "How can I help you?" That's the rule of law. That's the rule of law at its simplest, most basic, but most critical form.
Okay, so what can each of us do? How can we identify the specific aspects of the rule of law that are the most pressing in our area? I know that one of the things that was so surprising to me, and it's absolutely my favorite graphic in the literally thousands of graphics that the World Justice Project has, is about how does the United States compare on our rule of law values when we're comparing ourselves to other countries. And then what they did was they broke out the data for Democrats and Republicans. Who would have thought that it was exactly the same? After we've been telling you all of this recession, depression, and all these other things where we've got so much work to do, but at the end of the day, we're really the same. We all believe in the well-being of society. So we can use this World Justice Project Rule of Law Index as a jumping off point. While the data is both international and national in scope, you can find your local dimensions of the findings. And what this can help us do is assure equal access to justice. Judy is correct. In New Orleans, we are really blessed. I work as closely with my courts and my judges and the court personnel, the judicial assistants, the court clerks, everyone. We all know each other by name. I have all their cell phone numbers. They show up at my fundraisers for legal services program. We're dealing with the same issues all the time because we are all serving the same mission. We're all looking to have equal access to justice. We all want to preserve election integrity and voting rights. We all want, I've spent an entire career doing what every single woman, man and woman in this room have been doing, which is to build trust in governmental institutions, and especially fair and impartial courts. What else can we do? We can take action to address the rule of law priorities. We can educate the community. How many of you in your courts sponsor a rule day? I have the judges calling me before we even get to law day about trying to get judges in classrooms and get the students into the courts. One of my favorite things that I get to do, I work with the U.S. Marshals. I know them all by name. They travel with us to conferences because I have so many judges coming with me. I love to get to see when they bring in those Belgian Malinois dogs, you know, the really scary, the bomb-sniffing dogs and the battering rams. This makes a difference. This may be the first time that some of these children in these classrooms get to understand a mock trial and understand government. It may be the first time that they get to have a conversation with someone who's involved with law enforcement. This matters. It makes a difference. It makes for a stronger society. And I know that I'm giving you little bitty steps and you're used to hearing big ideas, but sometimes these little bitty steps, these little tiny things make a difference. Last night, I'm going to talk out of school. One of our federal judges saw that we're sponsoring a trip to Panama, the Republic of Panama, where the Panama Canal is. It's fascinating if you've never been there. And he texted me at 9:30. He says, look, I know it's really late, but I want to put you in touch with some of these other people down in Panama for when you go. And I was like, what a fantastic resource. We have relationships. So when I talk about creating a task force, that sounds so complicated, but it's really about developing relationships. And it's developing relationships with the people in our courts. So that's what we look at doing. And I know that we're good at doing it, but we need to do it better. We need to engage both the public and private sector leaders in championing the rule of law. And Judy always comes back and she says, Helena, where's a business leader on that panel? I want a business leader. Why don't we have a doctor? We need all of these people getting together to work on that. We need to educate others about the critical nature of the rule of law and the role of the courts in upholding it. It's about the well-being in society. You're in charge of it. Our courts are the safety net to the fabric of society. So I know that the energy and the creativity sitting in this room, and I'm looking at you, one of your past presidents who created the core competencies, this is what it will take for us to focus on this rule of law, because we are at that inflection point. Now is the time. So let's bring us up to the next slide. You can sign up to receive the U.S. Rule of Law Toolkit. I've got cards. I'll pass them out. I'll get you to Alicia. They've got some really cool graphics. I know that you are all over social media. I've been stalking you for a while now. I know who you are. So they created some really great graphics. And I just say to my communications director, put this graphic up. It's about communication. It's a different generation. The generations in my office, the 20 and 30 somethings, they're not watching NBC News on TV, y'all. They are looking on, God forbid, TikTok, or nobody does Twitter X anymore, I understand. Instagram. They're going on all these social media websites to get their news. Not just fun, they're not just shopping, they're getting their news. And they'll say to me, look, you should watch this. She's a high school civics teacher. She's talking about the rule of law. They'll send me stuff on the rule of law. They're like, this is how we learn it. So maybe we need to redouble our efforts in getting the word out to the people that need to hear it. What I want to say about this, they've also got these really nifty PowerPoint This is my PowerPoint champion. She takes this data. I am a data nerd. I am really happy in a spreadsheet. And I know that you are my people. You love spreadsheets too. But she can pull out this data that's absolutely extraordinary that you can work. She's got rule of law talking points. Talk about it. Bring it to your meetings. She's got social media resources. She's on LinkedIn. She's on all of these things. There are all types of things. They've got papers. They've got white papers. They've got down to the individual posts that you can put on Instagram. So what we're getting excited about is that you're going to release the data from this year because we want to see it's the current events. This is what got me so fired up about this. Judy said, Helena, would you look at this stuff? She asked me last summer. And I was like, oh my God, this explains the increase in my heart rate that I've been feeling since 2016. I know this stuff bothers you. It bothers me. I've spent an entire career working on public trust and confidence in our governmental institutions. And when I saw people tearing it down for what I felt was no good reason, just to make a political point or a funny statement, it bothered me. And it bothered all of my colleagues. So when I saw that there was a website with all this data and leading data scientists from around the world who had quantified this into numbers that could give me a quantifiable and measurable response to the impact this was having on society, on our well-being, what it was doing to the rule of law, I was thrilled. And I hope that you will be too by going to the World Justice Project's website.
Helena, maybe it would be a good idea if we, I think the perspective is one that Alicia alone can give us, and I want her to share this with you before we open up to questions. If you allow me to just pose a question to Alicia first. You see so much across the globe. I'm curious if you have any sense of perspective with regard to how the world is grappling at the very micro level with rule of law challenges. And I thought maybe you could talk about the justice challenge and what we do in that regard to not only put information out on data, but how we make that data come alive and track it.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. It's a great question. And I think everyone wants to know once they see this data, what can we do about it? How can we change it? What are the policy solutions and recommendations. One of the things that we can do very easily with our data is we can kind of hone in on what the problems are, what the specific issues are that people are seeing, what they're perceiving, what they're feeling and experiencing. And then, those can become kind of the basis for policy recommendations around, in different countries around the world. What Judy just mentioned with regards to our World Justice Challenge, is a really great effort that we also put on, which, I can't take a lot of, effort for personally, because there's a whole other team who works on this World Justice Challenge, and they do a lot of really great work gathering projects from around the world of actually rule of law practitioners who are looking at our data, seeing the problems in their countries, and saying, okay, we need to do something about this. So right now we are in the midst of kind of going through all of these projects that have applied for our World Justice Challenge. There are prizes of up to $10,000 for 5 different projects who are grappling with different rule of law issues. And right now we're looking at rule of law as the foundation for democracy as our big kind of talking point or topic for the World Justice Challenge. So any projects that are looking to strengthen rule of law as the foundation for democracy around the world are eligible to apply. We will be selecting the finalists in a couple of weeks at the ABA meeting in Chicago, or at an ABA meeting in Chicago, which we're really looking forward to. And we had, I think, over 400 projects apply from around the world, Perfect, thank you. From probably almost not quite, maybe not quite all of the countries in the world, but from, I think about, close to 90 countries around the world, 400 projects apply who are working on this topic, which is really, really incredible and really heartening to see. And we have people looking at technology. We have people looking at fundamental rights and the rule of law. We have people looking at all sorts of different issues and all sorts of different ways, court practices, how they can bolster their court systems in their countries to improve the rule of law. So if you go on our website, you can see the list of all of the 30 finalists that we have. Again, they're coming from all different regions of the world and are working on all sorts of different topics, but all with the idea of bolstering the rule of law to kind of help promote democracy in their countries. Working on election mechanisms in their countries, et cetera. So that's another way that we kind of go from the data, looking at the data, looking what the problems are, to actually trying to identify solutions. And if you go to our website, you can see the list of finalists who are all really working very hard to identify solutions in their countries to these rule of law problems that our data is kind of pointing out. So that is one way that we try to take, the data and make it a little more practical and actionable.
Yeah, and I will tell you, this has been going on for several years. So you've got, it's built up to like over 400, I think, this year, who filed their applications. It is a really hard whittle down, you can imagine, to get to the final 30 finalists. And the World Justice Project is flying them in to the American Bar Association meeting for this one-day rule of law and democracy summit that we're having adjacent to the ABA meeting on the Thursday that, of the ABA meeting. But when they come together at our forum that we hold about every other year in different parts of the world, there is this energy that you can't imagine, because it brings forth, with all due respect to most of the people in the room, and I include myself, it brings forth this youthfulness, this commitment, this energy at a different level. It's unparalleled. And some of them are court projects. And they're wonderful because they're working with those limited resources we talked about early, but they're making the best of it. And $10,000 in seed money, or for money for them to continue their project or expand it, doesn't sound like so much. But think about doing that, all over the world, and what you're doing in terms of building a greater community of people who care about these issues. And they're reporting back to us. And one of the best things about that work of the Justice Challenge is they don't just win the award, take their money and go home or report back. They become a part of a community, an online community, where they have each other as resources. So people in Morocco are talking to people, in different parts of of South America. They're talking to people all across the Central Coast. It is amazing to see the energy that is just forced through this funnel of the Justice Challenge. It's one of the best parts of, I think, the work that the World Justice Project does. With that, we can open it up for questions, Alea?
Yes.
Any question? Yes. If you need a microphone, they tell us to please say that, the nice gentleman in the back, because it's being live streamed.
Thank you. Since we have a couple of attorneys from Louisiana, how do the judges here respond when you talk to them about the rule of law, particularly when Louisiana is the state that has the second highest incarceration rate in the country, and that population is disproportionately African American? It seems like there needs to be a lot of work here in Louisiana when you talk about that accountability and that impartiality piece. How do the judges, police officers, things like that, how do they respond to that?
Great question. I can tell you from my perspective, they respond with an open ear, if you will, and hopefully an open heart, because I think it takes both, and an open mind, I guess, all three. So I've spent most of my organized bar time on years on criminal justice reform issues and death penalty work and other things. And I can tell you that we have a lot more work to do in the country, but of course in Louisiana. And the disproportionate impact on Black men particularly is it's inexcusable, is the word I'll say. But I can also tell you that there is, I think, a concerted effort to do better. And part of that doing better comes with when a court looks like a community. And when I say that, I mean everything from jurors and judges and court personnel and the highest of the justices in the land in our state. I think that's a critical first step. I think there is a growing awareness of that. There's backlash. Of course there is. There's always going to be backlash. And I've got to keep telling myself all the time. But I think it takes speaking out, whether it's perhaps not a judge, but a public official at the highest levels of our state who maybe doesn't respect the rule of law. We have to make sure that they understand, the public understands what the rule of law is all about. But from my perspective, I think one of the greatest changes that I have seen that has been an extraordinarily impactful one has been the number of women who have stepped up to serve. And when I say stepped up, I mean stepped up because it takes an awful lot to even put your name in the ring. When your hat in the ring, when you're in a state where it's hard enough when it's an appointed judiciary. Think about when it's elected judiciary. But women continue to step up and Black women continue to step up even more so. And that is a powerful antidote to anything that fails the rule of law. So I told you earlier, I'm an optimist. There are going to be struggles throughout my lifetime, but I can also tell you that I see a glimmer of constant hope nowadays. And I'm saying that on both the federal bench and the state bench. And let us not forget that most of the public is first introduced in this country to justice through administrative law judges and through state courts, right? And so it is critically important that the ranks of administrative law judges look like the community, that the state judicial courts at all levels look like the community, and not only the judges who are wearing the black robe, but everybody who people are coming in contact with. So I am hopeful is my bottom line answer. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
James.
Hi, yeah, James from Reno, Nevada. Out of curiosity, how many of when we deal with the results of your of the survey or report, whatever I should call it, since it's mostly based on opinion-based evidence, I was wondering if any of that is measured against any actual objective metrics on how to measure some of these, just to sort of cross-reference the whether or not opinion really meets reality for some of these topics. And secondly, how much of the poor marks that the country received for as far as people's faith in the justice system, how much of that do you think is linked to just faith in institutions in general across our country? Because there seems to be a lot of distrust of every institution, whether it's a court, law enforcement, elections, just across the board.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely at least take the first question. So our data, like you said, it's a lot of it is perception-based data from the general public. We also talk to legal experts and get their perceptions and experiences on both sides as well. But you're right, it is a lot of opinion-based data. And what we do when we are calculating the scores every year is we cross-check our data against, like you said, more other, whether they're country-level statistics, local-level statistics on, access to justice, fundamental rights, adherence to fundamental rights, openness of governments. We cross-check the data against, probably about 70 different sources for each country to see, does the data say, what does the data say in comparison to these sources? Is it in line with these sources? If it is, great. If it's not, we still think that that's an interesting finding, and that's something to kind of reckon with, right? If people think that there is no access to justice in a country, but all these other measurements say that there is, and the governments and the courts are saying that there is, there's clearly still some sort of disconnect, right? Between between the two. People are feeling as though they can't access courts when, maybe court administrators are saying that, yes, you can access courts and we're very accessible. So there's still something to be learned from that. So we can kind of contextualize the findings in that way, but we do always cross-check the data against, at least, a large number of sources to see, is it kind of measuring what we see as kind of the objective truth and reality, or is there, do there seem to be two different disparate realities going on where people are feeling one way, but, maybe something else is actually happening in practice. So yes, we do that.
Yeah.
That's an important part of the process.
Yeah, and I think, part of this is the obvious that for the person who is giving their input on the survey, their perception is their reality in great part. And we all deal with that disparate, realities. And it's how do we go about changing that if it's not in fact based in fact. If the court's open, that there's justice. How do we go about changing that? To your question about institutions, you're absolutely right. I think part of what we're seeing is the attacks on institutions across the board. That is something that is a phenomenon, as we all know, that builds on itself, right? And so it's not only the courts, which is critical, but not only the courts, it's other government institutions. It is the organized bar. There are lots of ongoing attacks. Many of you are seeing them in the organized bar in your jurisdictions. There's media. And so I think this notion of distrust is feeding on itself. And that makes your job even harder, but it also means that you're not alone. So with the challenges that the bar associations are feeling right now in many jurisdictions, including this one, is something that they can relate to and help the courts understand, when they're attacked. Because we all know, and one knows greater than you, that we cannot leave it to judges to defend themselves. We have got to stand up for them. We have got to be there not only on the allocation of resources that I talked about earlier, but when there are attacks on judges, we have got to stand up for them. They cannot stand up for themselves for very good reasons, and it is important that we do so. And that applies to me, to the court system as well. It is not only about the judges, it's about the court system and it operates. Helena, you want to add?
No, I think you've got one more question.
The American Bar Association, at the end of last year, published a book that Alan Carlson and I wrote that shows that Americans are voting with their feet against our courts. Our filings are going down. We have extensive data on 5 states, and the most data is from California, 41-year period of data. The actual number of civil filings in California was higher 41 years ago than it was in 2018. And of course, the per capita filings were down 35%. And the data that the National Center has on filings overall, as well as civil filings, show that in the pre-COVID years, filings of all kinds were going down. So there is just a single data point of objective data that substantiates the problems we're facing.
One more question. Anybody? Well, with no questions, I will just tell you.
I just have one question.
You have one question, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, do you all create mentoring programs for people who are interested but aren't as committed, right? So they want to learn more. So I know, this Alicia is the queen of it. So I didn't know if you all created mentorship programs for lawyers who maybe want to learn more, just aren't really ready to commit fully, or is there, I don't want to say a succession plan, but a legacy. So are we doing things with high school students to create this so that it's multi-generational? Sort of what's the platform? And I know you have an answer.
Yeah, that's a great. Oh, I think I'm still on. I think my mic's still on. Okay. Yeah. So really, our becoming involved as a lawyer with the World Justice Project is pretty easy, I would say. Maybe I'm a little biased, but it really involves taking one survey once a year. So it's not too big of a commitment. If you're kind of on the fence and thinking about whether or not you want to actually be participate with us. It's going to be about an hour of your time once a year to take our surveys. If you are, kind of on the fence, and we also offer that as kind of like a pro bono opportunity. If lawyers are interested in using or accumulating pro bono hours, they can do that to participate with us. But we're always happy to talk to people who are a little on the fence about it. We don't have like a mentorship or kind of program per se for people who are interested in participating but not yet quite ready to make the commitment. But we're happy to share our surveys. Our surveys are all online, so you can read them and see kind of what becoming part of the World Justice Project would look like. I think we actually have a lot of people who probably would want to participate with us more than they're able to. They want to take more surveys. They want to be more involved. So we are starting to develop strategic partnerships with bar associations around the world, law firms around the world, where they regularly do pledge to, participate with us, contribute to our surveys each year. And then in terms of school age kids, we haven't yet. We've talked about this a lot, and I think Judy, we've been part of these conversations about developing curriculum for school age kids about the rule of law and whatnot. We haven't quite rolled that out yet, but we're still in kind of conversations about that, and I think that would be very important for kind of the next generation of justice leaders in the world.
Let me just take a moment just for one point of closure, and that is, if you were interested in this work, you can be assured that we will help you. And you can be assured that there is a nearby state, local, or specialty affinity bar who we can help you collaborate with if you don't want to do it on your own. We're doing a lot of work with the National Conference of Bar Presidents right now and the American Bar Association. Like I said, we'll have a full-day summit at the upcoming meeting in August, and that is really targeted for leaders, future and present, of bar associations across the country. So if any of you have a particular interest in driving this forward, and I hope you do, give me your card and I will make the introduction if you don't have one, but you probably are very well versed in your local bar leaders and know them as well. But thank you for listening, Helena, Alicia.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you need to get in touch with any of us, please let me know. I have cards here, and we'll make sure that you get in touch with Alicia, because this is your link to the World Justice Project.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.